So the rear brake is only 10 to 20% of your braking power on the dirt bike, but it's still super important if you want to be the safest and most efficient rider, not only for stopping faster, but to have more control of your dirt bike, whether you're on the trails or the track. For example, that extra 10 to 20% of braking power could help prevent you from, let's say you're coming up to a corner and you take the corner and you found out that you still have too much speed going around the corner. Using the front brake and the rear brake allows you to stop before you potentially go off the cliff or hit a tree because you had too much speed carrying around that corner. Now, even though you probably use the rear brake, a huge mistake is not being smooth and efficient with it. So for example, it's really easy to use too much rear brake and cause the rear wheel to lock up. And when the rear wheel locks up, not only are you not stopping as quickly, but you don't have as much control, because when the rear wheel is locking up and you're still moving, the rear end could go side to side from you and you could lose complete control. But don't worry, this is really easy to do and there's a way to get around it. Now, probably the most common reason why it's easy to use too much rear brake is from using stiff dirt bike boots. But if you're not using dirt bike boots, then you're not as safe as you should be, because dirt bike boots are stiff and tall for a reason, to protect you from getting crushed or twisted. But that comes with a compromise of being stiff and just hard to have a good feel of the rear brake. So especially if you got brand new boots and they're super stiff, it's easy to just press down and it feels like you're not even pressing down, but it's locking up the rear wheel, so you're sliding out or you're not braking as quickly. So what do you do to get past that? Well, for one, you could break in your new boots by wearing them, walking around in them, just kind of bending them back and forth, and eventually they'll break in. Some take longer than others, but you definitely don't want boots that are just super floppy and easy to feel with, because that means they don't have as much protection. So once you get your boots broken in from wearing them, using them, then you want to practice riding. You can do this in your backyard. Just practice going 10-15 miles an hour and only using the rear brake to stop. And what you want to do is pay attention to whether or not the rear wheel is locking up or not. So start out by just slowly pressing the rear brake, and you want to pay attention to how quickly it slows down. Let's say you keep pressing it harder and harder each time, and then you look back and find out, oh, I just dug up some grass or dirt. You're probably locking up the rear wheel. It's all about forming a positive braking habit that allows you to feel how much rear brake you can use. And sometimes it's hard to use the rear brake when you're sitting and standing, because you don't have your brake pedal at a good height. So I like to have it pretty much parallel with my foot peg. It allows me to easily press the brake pedal if I'm sitting down or standing up, because some people have it down way too high when they're standing up, because if they're standing up, they're already pressing the brake pedal down. Well, one, you shouldn't have your toe covering the brake all the time when you're riding. You should only have it forward like this when you need to use the brake. So your feet, you should either be in the middle of your arch or on the balls of your feet. You shouldn't have your toes over the brake while you're riding. So have them back further, and then you just need to slide them forward to reach the front brake. So when do you use the rear brake? Well, you use it at the same time as the front brake generally, but when you're coming up to a corner, you want the bike to be upright, and you want to use the rear brake as much as possible before the corner, so that you can enter the corner smooth and better control your speed, rather than overshooting the corner or slamming into the rut or the berm and getting really out of control because it compresses the suspension too much. And you also want to do it braking when your bike is upright. So once your bike starts leaning like that, you're not going to have as much traction. So when you press the brake with the bike leaned over, it's a lot more likely to slide out, because it doesn't have as much weight on the tire, and you can lose traction, or it can break loose more easily. But you can also use the rear brake when you're in a corner. So maybe you carry too much momentum into a corner. This is when when you're sitting down, you can keep your toe over the brake, and you can kind of control your speed as well as your balance, because your speed is part of the equation to staying upright going around a corner. So it's a combination of leaning with your balance as well as your speed, because the faster you go, the more you can lean over generally in a corner. For example, if you come into a corner too hot and you feel maybe it's a rut and you feel like you're going to pop out of the rut, so it's a left-hand corner and you're going to your bike wants to stand up and pop out. Well, if you just lightly press the rear brake, this will slow you down and allow you to keep leaned into the corner and keep going, because you slowed your bike down, and it's a little bit easier to use in a corner than the front brake. You can also use the rear brake to do a brake slide when coming up to a corner. Maybe it's a flat corner and you want to swing the rear end out, but I really don't recommend this if you're a beginner or novice rider, because it's really not an efficient technique. That's easy to learn. It's not that much faster, if at all. You can also use the rear brake for safety purposes. Maybe you're doing wheelies, whether you want to or not, you can just tap the rear brake and it'll bring the front end right down. Or maybe you're riding up a steep hill and you find that it's really easy maybe you're sliding back on the bike while sitting down and you feel like the bike is looping out. Well, instead of looping out and flying back down the hill, you can just tap the rear brake and bring the front end down, and you might stop on the hill, so you might have to go back down and start over again, but it's a lot better than looping out. And then when you're going down hills, you have even less braking power with the rear brake going down hills, because the weight is on the front wheel, and when there's less weight on the rear wheel, you don't have as much traction, which means you don't have as much braking power. So a common mistake going down steep hills is you don't want to use as much front brakes, so you just hold the rear brake and this locks up the rear brake, and you just slide with the rear wheel locked up all the way down. And not only are you potentially going even faster, because all that dirt is clogged up in the tire and it's just sliding down, you're not really slowing down, you don't have as much control. So this makes it really easy to pick up speed and just really get out of control and maybe even go down and get hurt. So it's even more important going down hills to be smooth and efficient with the rear brake so that you're not locking it up. Now, since the rear brake is only 10 to 20% of your power, it's super important to use the front brake. And I really want you to check out this video on when to use the front brake so that you have more control, because you can stop faster, and this will allow you to be safer on the trail because you're not flying off the course, hitting a tree, or hitting someone else. I'm Kelly Fager from Motocross Hideout. Learn more, ride more, so that you can stay safe and have fun for many years to come.